Hi, I'm Neha Matthews, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. On today's episode, we dissect the decision to import African cheetahs to replace the extinct Indian cheetahs and how NRIs will be affected by a tax amendment in the budget. But first, we talk about the shootings at anti-CAA protesters in the capital. On 30th January, a 17-year-old boy wielding a gun shot at anti-CAA protesters and students at Jamia University, injuring one student. 12 station house officers and 300 policemen had been stationed at 3 districts in the morning to stop the march which had been planned from Jamia University to Rajghat in honor of Mahatma Gandhi's death anniversary. But eyewitnesses allege that the police did not sweep in when they could have.
Today we call for a march in respect to Gandhi ji. Gandhi यात्रा हम लोगों ने निकाली और हम लोग जब उधर से गेट नंबर 7 से हम लोग निकल रहे थे, then a person came and he was having a कट्टा. It's not a कट्टा था उसके हाथ में और वो तब से उसको मतलब हम लोगों ने पहले भी देखा था, लेकिन हम लोग उसको इग्नोर कर रहे थे. वो देश विरोधी नारे भी लगा रहा था और हम उसको इग्नोर कर रहे थे. लेकिन फिर जब देखा हमने कि वो पुलिस, जहाँ पुलिस की पूरी बैरिकेडिंग थी, वहाँ से ही जस्ट एंटर्ड, वो वहाँ से पुलिस उनके पीछे खड़ी है और ये पुलिस देख रही थी कि वो देश विरोधी नारे लगा रहा है और वो गन को लहरा रहा है, लेकिन पुलिस वहाँ पे मूक दर्शक बन के खड़ी रही.
2 days later, there was another shooting in Shaheen Bagh, where there have been ongoing protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act, primarily by women of the area, since December 2019. Again, on late Sunday night, there was an alleged incident of shooting near Jamia University. Soumya Lakhani, who has been covering these shootings, joins us now to discuss what happened and what measures the police is now taking in the face of backlash. So, Soumya, in about 4 days, Delhi has seen 3 incidents of shootings in areas of CA protests like Jamia and Shaheen Bagh. On January 28th as well, we had a man, whipping out a gun, supposedly a local, being chased out of Shaheen Bagh by the protesters. So that would be about 4 incidents of gun-toting miscreants. Yeah. Let's start with the shooting on the 30th, where this minor boy shoots at Jamia protesters. Could you tell us how the events unfolded?
So Jan 30th, as you know, is Martyrs' Day, and Jamia students wanted to march till Rajghat. So there was a group it was essentially a protest and a march. Police had said that, they'd cordoned off the area and they had told them that they aren't allowed to proceed further. In the middle of this, suddenly from the crowd, and this is the police's version, that suddenly from the crowd, this man emerged with his back towards a line of cops who were standing a few meters away and whips out a gun and is waving it in the air. And at some point, and you see in the video clip that for a few seconds, he's waving it in the air while reporters who were present covering the protest march and students themselves are screaming for help and are saying, pistol hai uske haath mein. And in the video, you realize that the police is not moving for a few seconds. And then he looks back, he turns around, and then he shoots into the crowd, which eventually injures a Jamia student called Shadab. So you see that the police is there. Now, when you speak to the police, they say their version is that his back was towards us, so we didn't realize that it was a pistol. And one senior police officer also told me that police personnel present there thought that it was probably a phone that he was waving in the air. So that's how it happened. That was on Jan 30th. You see in the video that police officer, one ATO Khalid Hussain. Khalid Hussain is the ATO of Jamia. He managed to neutralize this fellow. And turns out that the accused is a minor. He's a 17-year-old. So obviously, because of that, we will not name him and we can't name him or, publish his picture. But, the weapon was also found. Shadab was given help. He was sent to Holy Family Hospital. He was referred to AIMS after that. It left the students absolutely very, very agitated. Tremors were felt in other parts of the city, of course. Shaheen Bagh was a bit on edge because obviously you fear for your security if this is happening, especially the visual and the video that comes out of this.
I was wondering about the shooter himself. Could you tell me more about him, what the police learned about him, why he may have done what he did?
So we also scanned through his social media profile and, we've got some interrogation details. And it just appears that, this 17-year-old boy claims to be a member of of Bajrang Dal, RSS. Of course, the outfits themselves have sort of really distanced themselves from this guy. But you see videos and photos of him holding guns, and a colleague of ours went to his village, to his house, and we realized that he was a fanatic, as I would describe it. Beyond that, a lot of the people who knew him describe him as a very quiet person. So, a lot of people have great disbelief that, oh, was this even possible? But when you scan through his social media profiles, which we could only do very briefly because Facebook took it off. But yeah, he comes across as a bit of a fanatic. When once the incident happened and we went on Facebook and we went through his profile, there were 2 profiles to begin with. And, he's done a Facebook Live for like about an hour or 2 before the actual shooting. And there are some very distasteful messages that he's posted on Facebook about Shaheen Bagh and about the protest. And, so it gives you an idea that here's a person who was doing something. He was there with, he had an aim, he had a goal. So
coming back to what you were saying about Jamia students being agitated, one thing was we had BJP leaders like Anurag Thakur and Kapil Mishra who have had chants of Goli Maro Desh Ki Gaddaron Ko in their protests. These Jamia students now wanted action against this sloganeering. Has anything of that sort happened?
If you're talking about police action, no police action has been taken against this sloganeering. EC did apply some amount of restrictions on their star campaigners like Anurag Thakur for the chants that he said. But beyond that, there was no police action. And of course, students, residents, locals, everybody there is very agitated. And as, across where they believe that, this is something that maybe led to, this was an encouragement, and this was, what they said was step 1, and then the shooting was step 2. So there is a lack of faith between the students and the cops.
So 2 days after that, on Feb 1st, we have a shooter showing up in Shaheen Bagh. Can you tell us a little bit about that incident?
So, this was around 4:30, 4:45. There was 50 meters away from the Shaheen Bagh stage. So just right behind the stage, that stretch of one carriageway, one stretch of road is where this man walks in with a pistol and fires about minimum 2 rounds. One, according to eyewitnesses, one he fired in the air and one he just fired in front. Nobody was injured because this is an area which is usually occupied by very few volunteers, and which is why there was no crowd there. But there were a few people who saw, there were a few people who managed to neutralize him, and this is right near the police barricades. Now, eyewitnesses say that they neutralized this fellow, and then, he threw his pistol in the bushes, which was then retrieved, and the bullets you can see, we saw them, there are photos, etc. as well. And then the man was handed over to a police person who was present there. This is a 25-year-old man, father of a 3-year-old girl, runs a dairy business in Dallupura. Now, what the police has told us is that during interrogation, this man said that he was really fed up of the traffic and the inconvenience that it was giving to commuters because of these protests. Apart from that, there are also videos of, him when he's been neutralized and handed over to the cops. He is chanting Jai Shri Ram, and he is saying things like, Hindustan sirf Hinduon ka hai. There are videos. There is this radicalized tendency that you're seeing. But this happened very close to where the women have been sitting for now a record of 50 days. And of course, it led to a lot of chaos, fear, grief, anger, within the protest site as well. But later in the evening when I was there, I realized that the women were very confident about not going back. So there was this resilience, this resolve of staying back and carrying on with the protest. Now, what the Delhi police and the volunteers at Shaheen Bagh, what they've done is they've really beefed up security, or it appears they have beefed up security. So, for example, all the lanes that are there, that are leading to the protest, there are gates there. Now, volunteers stand at all those gates, especially since the protest. They've started frisking people, they've started checking their IDs. If you are a person who wants to speak on stage, there is a whole process. So, you'll be checked, your ID will be seen, it will be discussed what you're going to speak, which is something that Shaheen Bagh had been doing anyway. But now I think they're just more stricter with this. There were also talks of putting up CCTV cameras to bring in generators so that even if electricity goes, the area, the protest site is well lit. So nothing untoward can happen. That was on Feb 1st.
Now, Feb 2nd, we have another incident which may or may not have been a shooting, is the police version. Could you tell us about that so we can maybe dissect that a little bit?
So a little before midnight on Feb 2nd, I'd say, moving into Feb 3rd, it was flashed that, there has been another shooting at Jamia Gate number 7, near Gate number 7. Now, Gate number 7 is also where the stage is. So a few meters away from there is where they said the shooting had happened. A day after also, police has said that they don't have any evidence to prove that the shooting had happened. However, an FIR under sections 307, which is attempt to murder, has been filed, and also under the Arms Act. So police has filed an FIR. They are investigating the matter. There is a CCTV footage that is available, but the CCTV footage doesn't show a shooting. It just shows that, there is some chaos that happens and people run towards one part of the road, the other carriageway. But no, there is,
no gun has been retrieved, no bullets have been found.
Nothing, none of that. Eyewitnesses claimed that, whatever they claimed that they saw, they also mentioned that there was a two-wheeler. They gave a registration number also, the number plate, whatever they could read. But they haven't come to a conclusion about it. But police has again sort of beefed up security in the area. There are 2 pickets. They've also spoken to the alumni group of Jamia. They've also spoken to residents, special CP, joint CP, they've all gone. Volunteers at Jamia, that is the Jamia Coordination Committee, has also started frisking people, checking their IDs, checking cars, sort of looking and inquiring if there's somebody they find suspicious. So efforts are on to make sure that these places are safe.
This was also preceded by the Jamia violence, the JNU violence, in which a lot of questions were asked about why the police didn't intervene or why did they go into Jamia and beat up students. What is the police doing to combat this? Because this is a crisis in faith towards them.
So obviously their students, especially residents, people who live there, they're very unhappy. They do believe that the police hasn't done their bit. There is a crisis of faith that they're dealing with. There is a constant belief that, for instance, when the Jamia shooting happened, the January 30th shooting, when that happened, we went to Shaheen Bagh also a day later, and, the tremors were felt in Shaheen Bagh, where protesters said that, hey, what if this happens here? Is the police going to look out for us? Are they going to care for us? Are they going to ensure that we're not injured or hurt? Or are they going to try and neutralize this person on time? So there are a lot of questions. And, Delhi police has a lot of work to do. They have to that image is a bit tarnished, I would say, and they have a lot of trust building efforts that have to be done. So I was speaking to a senior police officer today, and I asked him that, you keep saying that the incident, the 3rd shooting that we're talking about that happened on Sunday night, you don't have any conclusive evidence to even say that the incident happened. Then why did you file the FIR so quickly? And one of the reasons he said was because we want to maintain a good relationship with the residents and the students. I believe there is an effort that police is making, a little bit of an effort of sort of ensuring that students and residents there don't feel that they're being completely unheard. Efforts are being made, but I believe there's a long way to go.
In the budget 2020 released on Saturday, there were certain clauses pertaining to non-resident Indians, which due to lack of clarity caused a lot of confusion. So will NRIs be taxed differently? Or will those residing in countries that don't charge income tax have to pay the same in India? Udit Mishra, who writes on the economy for Indian Express, joins us to explain. So, Udit, when the budget 2020 was released, there were certain clauses pertaining to non-resident Indians. Nirmala Sitharaman didn't read these out in her speech, but there was a lot of confusion ensuing then because there was no clarification. What were people confused about?
So in the finance bill that comes along with the union budget every year, the government proposed an amendment to the Income Tax Act, in particular Section 6 of the Income Tax Act, which pertains to how do you decide whether a particular person is a resident of India, especially for taxation purposes. And one of the amendments there suggested that a citizen who is not paying taxes anywhere in the world and is outside India, even if he's not spent a single day in India, will be deemed as an Indian resident. And as such, his income would be charged. That is, the Indian income tax laws will apply to his income. Now, this obviously raised a massive hullabaloo because there are a lot of people, say a lot of people from Kerala who work in the Gulf, say UAE, which is a tax-free jurisdiction. They do not pay taxes there. And immediately the import was that whatever X amount they earned in a year in UAE would then attract Indian income taxes, which is substantial. And moreover, more importantly, it basically undermines the whole point of going out and working and repatriating all that money. Why would you go all the way and work there if not for enjoying more benefits? And moreover, there's also a sovereignty issue. How could you undermine their policy, UAE's policy of having a tax-free income tax regime and attracting a certain kind of talent, and you are going to tax it? So it raised a lot of hue and cry. And within a day, the government came out with a clarification. So that was essentially the whole issue.
Let's start with the basics. Now, say a country like India, if they were to tax a person, how do we decide who to tax?
Right. So there are two basic parameters here. The most important parameter is residency. Now, say in a country like United States, if you are a citizen, then you are a resident, regardless whether you're staying there or not. And for taxation purposes, they apply that marker. But in India, that doesn't work. In India, you have to be actually a resident for a certain period of time. And then for income tax laws to apply, you don't necessarily also have to be just an Indian citizen. Even a outsider, any individual who's spending enough time in India and earning income here would have to pay income tax. So residency is one big thing. And the other thing is source. Where are you getting the income from? As such, imagine that if you're somebody sitting in the US and have a house here and get rental income from India, then typically that rental income would attract income tax in India. Similarly, if you're sitting in Delhi and have a house in London and that gets you rental income, that would also attract. So in the first case, it would be the source, because the source of income is in India. In the second case, it would be because you are yourself the resident of this country. Basically, either you are the resident of this country and hence your income is charged, or else your income is coming from this country and that part of the income, that fraction of the income will be charged. So that's broadly the two ways in which we decide.
So now with the finance minister clarifying on Sunday what this meant, did that clear any doubts?
Yeah, so the issue is that now what the government's intent here was that there are a lot of people, at least there are some people, who game the system, who ensure that they do not stay in India for the X number of days that would make them qualify as a resident of India, right? And they do this in other jurisdictions also and save taxes everywhere. So basically don't pay taxes anywhere. And these are the so-called stateless people. And what the government was trying to do was a well-intentioned move in that sense that, well, if you are somebody who's gaming the system, we'll tax you. We will deem that you are a resident of India because you do not pay taxes anywhere and you are an Indian citizen. We'll deem that you are a resident in India. So that part, the government's intent was justified. Where perhaps the communication was lacking, and which has now got clarified, is that the idea was not to tax all the income earned elsewhere. The idea was to tax the income that such people would be earning from India.
So there's no worry that, say, a person who's an citizen working in the Middle East, their entire salary there may be taxed here. That is not happening.
No, that is not happening. And the government has clarified that. And they have said that they'll make the necessary changes in the amendment to the Income Tax Act that they are bringing about.
But certain things like you mentioned, were they already taxable before this announcement? Say rent that is coming in. I think we had Nirmala Sitharaman saying this is going to be an anti-abuse provision. Like the clarification, does it also cause more questions to crop up?
Well, hopefully it should not. I mean, a lot of people are now realizing that the intent was not to penalize any and everybody who's going out and working, but the idea is to penalize those or catch hold of those who are gaming the system. And that, by any measure, there are more people evading taxes as a proportion of population within India than I would suspect that number of people as a proportion gaming the system outside. So government's move is justified, but the messaging was perhaps not as articulate.
With this backlash, though, even though it was preliminary, do you think this proposed amendment will pass?
Yeah, it should pass. I mean, under normal circumstances, I mean, government has the majority on the floor of the House, so that should not be a worry. But obviously, if it was the case that people thought that their genuine incomes in other lands would be taxed, then it would raise a huge political outcry. I mean, anybody who goes outside the country to earn better money, this would undermine all that and impose Indian taxes on those incomes. It would neither fly with those countries nor with the individuals. So that was a non-starter, and I'm sure the government has realized that was not their intent. They have clarified that also. So,
decades after the cheetah went extinct in India, the Supreme Court has cleared a proposal for importing a few from Africa. The apex court set up a 3-member committee, which is to guide the National Tiger Conservation Authority, who will eventually make the decision on whether to import these African cheetahs or not. But this project itself throws up questions about conservation of species and whether introduction of an exotic species makes up for the extinction of an indigenous one. Associate Editor Jay Mazumdar joins us now to explain the issue. So, Jay, to start with, could you tell us about how the Indian cheetah species went extinct?
The cheetah was hunted to extinction by the 1950s, though we had hundreds and thousands of captive animals with different royalties. They don't breed very well in captivity, so they could not recover. And by the 60s, cheetah was lost in India, though there were some sporadic reports after that, but we can say they went extinct nearly 50 years back.
And now this plan to introduce African cheetahs to India, that was first floated, I think, in 2009. What would proponents of this plan say the purpose is, and why was this idea shot down then?
See, this idea was never very practical. So it was not conceived with some utility in mind. It was more of a idealistic plan to have an animal that we have lost back from extinction. And to put it in perspective, that this is the only big carnivore that we have lost in modern history. So there was this idea for many decades that we should have it back somehow. There were some plans to clone it, which did not materialize because we did not have the genetic material from Iran, and we didn't have any in the captivity. So this idea came up in 2009 to have a few animals from Africa. And initially there was some doubt about the genetic purity, but then it was ascertained that the two subspecies, the African and the Asian, they separated some 5,000 years back. So in a historical timescale, that's not too far back over, and they are quite closely related. So that was one aspect. But when it came up before the Supreme Court, it was shot down primarily because of two reasons. One is that, yes, it is an exotic species, though they're not too distinct as subspecies, but these cheetahs are not Asiatic cheetahs. So that was one aspect. The other more important point was that the cheetahs were supposed to come to Kunopalpur, and that was a forest sanctuary that was being prepared for the lion, to create a second home for the Asiatic lion so that they are not wiped out if there is a natural calamity or if there is a epidemic. So the court observed that since India could not translocate the lions for nearly 20 years, the plan is hanging fire since the early 90s. So now to have a cheetah project and to supersede that plan may not be a great idea. And so the court said that bring lion and forget cheetah. Okay. So that was the stand in 2013.
And now in December, we had the Supreme Court approving this move. But if they were, say, to be imported to India, where would they be hosted now?
So the government has looked into a few options in Rajasthan, also in Gujarat. But chances are that they will come to MP if they come at all. And Kunopalpur is back in contention, but it may not be the spot which will get to host these cheetahs because the prey base is not adequate, and also the lion question hangs there. So they have a new sanctuary called Nauradehi, where they plan to have a huge enclosure of about 125 square kilometer, and where they will do a soft release and supply them with prey, and then they will over time try and release them in the wild, in the open.
One major worry that comes up with, say, introducing exotic species to a new ecosystem would be what effect they would have on that ecosystem and the indigenous species there. Was this a worry with the African cheetahs as well?
Yeah, see, the issue of introducing exotic species, the main concern is that because they don't have any natural checks and balances, they usually outcompete the other species. In this case, that is not the concern because, one, that they are not really exotic. They are closely linked to the subspecies we had. And secondly, in all likelihood, cheetah will struggle to survive. So the question of them outcompeting our species really doesn't arise. But the problem which it could pose in terms of competition to other carnivores in the landscape where they will be introduced, because if you introduce a new species, they will obviously compete with the existing ones, like wolves we have in Noradehi, so they'll have to compete. And also they may, if they're introduced in the areas where we had Great Indian bustards, they may prey on them, and that may damage the chances of recovery of that bird we have.
I mean, you've previously also talked about how our resources for conservation in India are very meager. So would there perhaps maybe this, it's an expensive project, would this be introduced at the cost of, conserving indigenous species that are already at risk here in India?
Yeah, that's perhaps the main concern, because in South Africa, for example, we have cheetahs in huge enclosures. So as a vanity project, or if you want to have some animals in a ranch-like atmosphere, that is always possible. But the issue is that if India can afford that, we have very meager budget for conservation. And if you take away tiger and the tiger forests, so the annual allocation for the rest of the country's forests and all species comes to about 165 crore a year. So compared to that, this cheetah project, when it was conceived 10 years back, they pegged the first year's expenditure at about 300 crore. So clearly it's expensive. And if we can fund this project from some external agencies or sponsorship, even then it may not make really great sense, because we have a very thin, overstretched forest management, wildlife management system. So they will have to focus on these, and they will be further stretched. And as I said before, that this may not add any conservation value to India, and it may, on top of that, create problem for the existing species that need that fund. And we have 20 plus identified species identified by the government that need urgent intervention for recovery. So we need fund there. That should be the priority.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.